Metal Podcast, episode 22, Merciful Fate. Welcome to the Requiem Metal Podcast. I'm Mark Rudolph.
And I'm Jason Hundy.
Tonight we're going to tell you a little story about Melissa.
Yeah. The true tale of possession and demonic sacrifices and all kinds of other things that are right up King Diamond's alley. We're doing some Merciful Fate tonight for those of you who are King Diamond fans out there, or those of you who aren't. Mm-hmm. You get to enjoy some quiet happenings with Merciful Fate.
And however you feel about the band, I mean, I felt this way for years about them, but I mean, looking after giving them an honest listen, and like all the stuff they've influenced is just unbelievable. And they're just a fantastic band all the way around. It just takes getting past his vocals. If you're going into it dead serious, you know, you got to take a little bit of comedic license to stuff, but it's unbelievable stuff. I'll leave that there.
And what you just heard there on Evil, I mean, how could you resist, you know, just the opening of that song? It kind of says it all.
I don't think really anybody else has done vocals to his degree. I mean, we've got, you know, Halford and Dickinson and, you know, a handful like Jeff Tate, but nobody that has that kind of like crazy operatic range, which we'll hear a lot more coming up.
Absolutely. We were talking, he's like the Jeff Buckley of extreme metal or something.
Basically.
He's just got this unbelievable range, and his ability well, you know, he was trained as an opera singer, correct?
That's as far as I know.
Yeah, I don't know if that's
It's
like
not too far from the truth. I mean, just, you know, I can imagine that being true just hearing.
I mean, I don't know. Well, I should know because I took an opera class, not by choice, but a history of opera kind of thing. But I would imagine he can probably hit 2 or 3 octaves at least.
Oh yeah,
you know,
I would say.
But like almost in like a 10-second stretch. I mean, he can go. He can go to
he's got
quite a
stuff
few places.
And like and in the shadows where he's almost doing like opera warm up exercises kind of stuff.
Yeah,
he's just like hitting like 6 different notes,
which you'll hear later on in the show for sure. But
yeah, the band's not just, you know,
King Diamond. But he seems to be sort of this not only icon of the band, but he's really a heavy metal icon. And, you know, right down from the dress, from the lyrics, from the corpse paint, from
I can say he's probably the 3rd most famous corpse paint wearing, you know, outside of Alice Cooper and Gene Simmons.
Sure.
I mean, Diamond's been wearing this stuff for 25 years or more.
82.
Yeah.
I mean, that's...
I don't know if he did in his previous band, Black Rose, if he had the same kind of thing going on, but I got to imagine he had some kind of... he's always had incredibly strong occult imagery, and he's always like had really interesting... as far as lyrics, I mean, it has all kinds of like occult and satanic bends, but he's got like these continuing stories that go from album to album to album.
Yeah.
Pretty interesting stuff.
And Evil kicks off the debut record, Melissa, which is sort of a running theme through the first 3, at least, Merciful Fate records, even though the first 3 Merciful Fate records stretch 10 years. So, you know, it's a story that took 10 years to tell, and it kicks off with Melissa.
82 they put out the Nuns Have No Fun EP.
Yeah.
And then the first full-length Melissa came out 83, and then 84... came Don't Break the Oath. And then there's like a 9 or 10 year gap before In the Shadows comes out.
Now, did Nuns Have No Fun? Is that where he had No Presents for Christmas?
No, that was a Fatal Portrait.
Oh, okay, that's right. That's the King Diamond. And here's the thing with King Diamond, and as Mark said, you know, I'm in the same boat in that I, for years, sort of resisted wanting to like pay any mind to Merciful Fate and King Diamond and stuff, simply because I kind of thought of, you know, King Diamond is almost kind of a joke in a way, because I couldn't really understand what he was doing compositionally, and I couldn't really understand like where he was coming from with all these like ridiculous sort of flying vocal lines and stuff. But
when he basically kind of came out of the late 70s.
Sure.
I mean compared to like Kiss and Alice Cooper, he's pretty tame as far as his looks go, but he had that kind of theatricality going on, and I don't think I could wrap my head around the irony of that at a young age.
Yeah.
It just seemed kind of stupid when everybody else was wearing like, you know, bullet belts and black leather jackets and stuff.
And here he was with, I mean, there's pictures of him sometimes with like top hats and, you know, wearing the
on his microphone, he's got the cross,
the upside down cross, microphone,
bones that are taped together and stuff. So
it, you know, and he's, I think, like you said, he's not, I don't want to say use the word relic, because that's sort of saying that like there's nothing good coming from him anymore, but like he is sort of this person from the past. He's sort of the link between many different eras of metal, because I mean, in some ways Merciful Fate is seen as kind of the, you know, one of the early forms, along with Venom, kind of that birthed black metal and some of the designs of death and even thrash metal, if we talk about
I think so.
Influence they had on Megadeth and Metallica sound. And so, you know, here he is, he's bridged this gap, and then like, of course, you know, he almost opens up after that. He kind of opens up the doorway to like occult metal, gothic metal, and he's still kicking it today, you know.
He's still doing, I mean, his last record was pretty solid. I mean, he's had a couple clunkers out there, but look for longevity. The guy's been, I don't know how many records he's put out, but it's like got to be over 20.
And I think that's why, like, after maybe like back in the mid 90s when I was first kind of getting into a lot of this stuff, it was hard for me to take a guy like this seriously. But then seeing that, like, he's done this since 82 and he's stuck to the same, like, he hasn't like given up on that, and there's something to be said about that. I mean, there's something really honorary in the fact that he hasn't taken the paint off. He hasn't, you know, he's still doing that same sort of imagery, and he's really sort of devoted himself to that. And
I think there's honest love behind it for him. I mean, the guy, he seems to be really into, storytelling as far as, you know, bringing these things along, and you know, he's not just a guy that's holding on just to make extra money and touring like Kiss or somebody's doing. So
and that's where I think I was able to get past like maybe my initial, you know, kind of lack of interest. Or
and then you hear bands like Emperor and Witchery and all these bands like touting them as being like one of the most influential bands to them. And then when you get past the lyrics, or not the lyrics so much, but the vocals, and you hear what's going on with the music, it's unreal. And it's like, why didn't I listen to this all along?
I mean, Evil alone, the track you just heard that opened the show up, I mean, had like 10 different solos sort of going on in it.
Yeah, it almost has like an old like Maiden Killers kind of feel to it, mixed with Priest, mixed with all kinds of stuff. It's just really, really great record, and I can't stress enough how much everybody needs to go and buy it.
Yeah, and hopefully like this show will do for you what sort of has happened with Mark and I in the past like year and a half in terms of our sort of turnaround response to King Diamond, and not only solo stuff, but certainly the stuff we're going to be playing tonight, the Merciful Fate era. In the early 80s, there weren't bands out doing anything like this. And if you read, I know Ian Christie sort of talks about the sort of out of left field approach that Merciful Fate came out, when they put Melissa and Don't Break the Oath out in 83 and 84, that nobody else was doing anything remotely like this. I mean,
no, not at all.
Metallica hadn't put out, Kill 'Em All yet. Slayer hadn't come out with Show No Mercy. I mean, no one took, there were cult lyrics that you could find like in Black Sabbath, for instance, at times, but Black Sabbath was very slow. You add like these twin leads that Judas Priest and Iron Maiden and Diamond Head and some of the new wave of British heavy metal
musicianship
bands were doing, and then this propulsive sort of rhythm section, and then you throw like, the Black Sabbath occult stuff on top of that, and then here you got a guy in corpse paint,
singing opera
over top of, I mean, no one knew what to expect. It's a very European record, Melissa and Don't Break the Oath, and they hail from Denmark, and of course, as the story goes, the person who really launched Merciful Fate in America was probably Lars Ulrich, because of his ties to Denmark, because he's Danish.
And he was a huge proponent of underground thrash.
Yeah, and he was doing a lot of tape trading and stuff. And so when Metallica started to blow up in '83, like he kept dropping, Merciful Fate to a lot of these other East Coast or West Coast thrash bands, and suddenly, people started to like pay more mind to what Merciful Fate was doing, and even see that influence.
Metallica's what was it, Garage Inc. that they put out, what was it, mid-90s or something?
96, 97,
It's got a medley of Evil, Curse of the Pharaohs,
I think Satan's Fall,
and Corpse Without a Soul.
Yeah, so, and those of you who maybe, are big Metallica fans or pick that record up, maybe, this will get you to sort of listen to the old stuff too, because you're going to hear like, the real versions, not just the James Hetfield singing over top of them versions, I can't remember, did Hetfield, was he able to pull off any of the kind of like Fate screams, or did he not even try?
He didn't really even try it too much. I mean, he just kind of kept it to their, and it's basically just like they managed to cut the theme out of each thing, just like the riff that everybody knows from that song kind of thing.
There's very few people that I've heard in metal who are able to do some of the vocal apparatics that he's able to do. Danny Filth on some of the earlier Cradle of Filth records, I think
it's more scream. It's
his
not,
voice got tired, but I mean he's doing the. Yeah, you're right. Danny's sort of covering up with it by just sort of outright screaming. He's not really singing at a lot of those points.
Because, there's probably like 5 or 6 distinct vocal styles that, the King Diamond sing, with the super high operatic stuff, and he does the more low talky stuff, and the super high falsetto vocals.
And Isan did a pretty nice job with them on Gypsy. And we're going to be hearing Gypsy, the Merciful Fate version, a little bit later. But interesting enough, that's the song Gypsy that brought me back into possibly like wanting to listen to like the real stuff, because I had really sort of just ignored King Diamond, kind of thought he was a joke or something like you did. And then Emperor did this cover of Gypsy on the Tribute to Merciful Fate record that was done, I think, for Listenable Records, and I think you can find it on the 10 years of Emperor double disc compilation that they put out, Candlelight put out a few years back. And, I was like, this is pretty awesome. Music's cool. And, I kind of was digging the fact that Isan was actually taking some of Diamond's vocals and actually putting them into real Emperor songs, like Nine Equilibrium and Prometheus. He started to do some of the higher register kind of falsetto singing that King's
it started to make sense.
And the pieces all sort of fit together. And then I stumbled across Abigail like a year and a half ago and just listened to the crap out of that, and then went back and got some of the Merciful Fate stuff.
I think I got picked up all the Merciful Fates. I mean, really, I think the 3 essentials are just, you get Melissa, Don't Break the Oath in the Shadows. I think that's a pretty good cross section of Merciful Fate. King Diamond's a whole nother.
Yeah,
I mean it's very similar, but that's another show.
And we'll talk about King Diamond, and maybe I think we're going to play a sample of what King Diamond sounds like, his solo stuff, so that maybe you can in your mind kind of compare the two different styles. But we'll get to that a little bit later. But in terms of Melissa, like you said, this record specifically really has kind of an older, early 80s metal production to it, like
new wave of British heavy metal kind of
thing. Yeah, like the Paul Di'Anno years of Iron Maiden, that same sort of sound, or British Steel or Stained Class, Judas Priest, all that sort of stuff is sort of it has that sort of low tone warmth to it.
Yeah, real analog kind of 70s warmth to it.
But and this, you prefer this record, right? Out of the two, the early two.
Yeah, I think it's a more dynamic. I mean, it's got more. Every single song is fantastic on it, I think, and it's got more range and dynamicism to the. Some could say that's a little bit all over the place. It's not as focused as it says "Don't Break the Oath," but
in terms of personalities and stuff, and we've talked about this before. Like you've always been more drawn to like the less polished, more. I want to say like emotional, like. It may be a little bit rougher and not as well produced.
I really like the first two Iron Maiden records, and even like as far as like any kind of heavy metal stuff goes, I like stuff that has a little bit more. It's not as tight. It's not all like worried about like playing stuff on a click track and all this. It's got a little bit of room to move. Even like the older Catatonia stuff that you try to play along with it on drum kit, it's completely off time, but it works within the context of the song.
Sure,
I think there's just a lot you can tap from kind of that naivete that you can really like. Just out of creative desperation, you can come up with some really awesome stuff.
Yeah, and so in terms of like kind of our two personalities, I mean, I would say Chris has always been more into like the cleaner stuff. You've been more into like the dirtier stuff, and I kind of go in the middle. So I'm kind of torn between whether I like Melissa or Don't Break the Oath more. So maybe I'll just go within the shadows.
There you go.
I'll make it simple on myself. But some other influences you'll hear when we're going to play a trio of songs here in a second from Melissa, the debut record. You and I were kind of rocking out a little bit earlier to some old Ozzy and some of the Stained Class, Judas Priest, like Beyond the Realms of Death. Because one of the things that Merciful Fate does is, Hank Sherman is the guitar player along with Michael Denner, and those two are these sort of great bouncing, that they sort of bounce off each other in terms of their styles of play. Sherman's more, like you said, angular, I think.
Yeah.
He kind of shreds. He plays a little bit faster. Denner like opens up his sound a little bit more. He's a little bit more
plays
melodic.
Around, has fewer notes, and does more with them.
Yeah, and he kind of like a Michael Scheckner, George Lynch type of approach in a way. But the other thing that they put in there is a lot of the sort of like atmospherics, a lot of like kind of weird kind of eerie acoustical kind of things, almost like what Dio was doing with the Black Sabbath Heaven and Hell kind of era.
Even like old Rainbow stuff that Richie Blackmore was doing, and
and even like the stuff that we were rocking out to earlier, the Randy Rhoads era of Ozzy with like Diary of a Madman, the title track specifically had some sort of eerie atmospherics and orchestrations going on for it, and then of course Priest, Beyond the Realms of Death, so it's these are all sort of musical influences you'll definitely hear through here, but at the same time totally original. Like that's the hardest part about talking about Merciful Fate is who do they sound like? Well, they sound like an amalgamation of like 15 different bands, but completely, like we said, out of left field. Like no one had sounded like these guys, and that's why they kind of, I think, made the impact they did, and it just took a few years, I think, for their impact to be fully felt. And
I think, it kind of spread across Europe a lot quicker than it spread across the United States. Even though I remember seeing, even when I was in high school, King Diamond T-shirts, and I was like, what is this?
Who is this guy? Yeah.
Yeah, like, the people that listened to Merciful Fate and King Diamond they didn't usually listen to a whole lot of other, like, like Pantera or any of that kind of stuff. It's just like one little, narrow genre they just love.
It's almost, it really is almost its own traditional metal genre. It's so rooted in 70s stuff, but yet it has some of the flair that the 80s had with the twin leads coming out a lot, and the vocals that were like Priest and Maiden, and I mean, it's but yet the darkness that really represented the late 80s and 90s with the black metal scene and the death metal scene.
A lot of the lyrics are pretty intense.
Yeah, and that was the other thing that we were going to say, is that on Melissa and Don't Break the Oath, really the Satanism is pretty overt, and King Diamond is pretty outspoken as being a practicing Satanist.
Yeah,
he's not,
which I can't totally wrap my head around. But I mean, it's more of the, if you ever hear the David Vincent interviews, the whole selfism thing.
Extreme humanism. I guess you'd say, almost selfish.
Diamond's not the kind of guy that's going to go out and sacrifice a goat on his backyard or anything, but he seems to be deeply into the whole spirit world thing, and
he talks a lot about possession in his songs. I mean, Abigail
and all the gothic horror elements, like the Bell Witch, for example. I mean, brings in all
ghost story,
all these kind of old ghost stories and things. So.
But anyways, we're gonna rock out a trio of songs here. Curse of the Pharaohs, which I wanted to throw a plug in for you. Tell us a little bit about your personal nature with Curse of the Pharaohs.
There's sugarycereals.com, which is a kind of an all ages anthology where we do stories that are based off of the kind of aesthetic of 80s cartoons. I've got a story in that called Curse of the Pharaohs, and you can check that out at cbcomics.com.
cbcomics.com, cool. So we're going to do Curse of the Pharaohs and then Into the Coven, and then the last thing we're going to play, and we'll talk a little bit more about it when we come back, is sort of really a great representation of the epic style that Merciful Fate was able to unfold. It's an 11-minute tune called Satan's Fall, and it's sort of multi-part, kind of like a mini rock opera in a way.
Yeah, really.
So enjoy some Melissa era Merciful Fate. Welcome back. That was Satan's Fall you just heard, Into the Coven and Curse of the Pharaohs. And I know Satan's Fall in particular was a song you were sort of lobbying for pretty strongly because you felt it was kind of spotlight a lot of the diversity that Merciful Fate kind of brought to the table. I mean, what about that song kind of...
Yeah, I mean, it kind of has it's got every bit of Diamond's range. It's got where they kind of go through where we've got some great guitar leads. We've got some slow like interlude sections. I think it's like one of the quintessential. It's a little long-winded. It could be cut down a little bit, but I think it's one of the quintessential Merciful Fate songs in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. I'd definitely throw it up there with like Evil, in terms of just sort of being very representative of that type of sound. And in terms of we've got some background metal cat. So we've. In terms of the influence that these guys had on people, we've talked about, the black metal scene and the thrash scene and some of that kind of stuff. But
is that you, Melissa?
Yeah, that must be the spirit of Melissa in the room somewhere. But some of the really specific things that are people that have been influenced. You mentioned Mike Amat from Carcass and Arch Enemy. You hear a lot of the...
Oh, I hear a lot of that. Both Diener and Sherman kind of coming through in his solo playing.
And obviously Slayer in terms of the occult in the lyrics, and also some of the just playing off of sort of kind of twin leads and things like that. I mean, not so much the vocals or anything, but in terms of the darkness of the music, certainly Slayer was one of the first... when you hear Slayer compared to like Metallica... Slayer was obviously a lot more dangerous, and that's one of the things you could say about Merciful Fate's first two records is it was very dangerous. You got your hands on this as a kid. I'm sure reading the lyrics, you're pretty shocked by some of the stuff that's going on. Like, for instance, on the next record, we're going to be looking at "Don't Break the Oath." I mean, there's some pretty outright sort of black metal lyrics in a way, about sacrifice and. Melissa, a song we didn't play, the opening lyric of it is he's sitting at the altar with the Satan's cross on the wall. I mean, it's horror movie stuff.
There's I dispel the Christian faith and, abhor all this stuff. And I mean, it's pretty stock stuff now, but 82, 83, that's pretty huge.
Yeah. And he was really pushing buttons. And I guess from what I've read, there was a little bit of tension in the band because, Hank Sherman, who was one of the primary writers, I think he wrote 4 or 5 of the songs on Don't Break the Oath.
9 songs on it.
Yeah, and he wrote a lot of Melissa, I think, and before Denner and those guys kind of took over and became more inspired as songwriters. Even Diamond started writing a lot of songs too, but he and kind of King kind of butted heads a little bit over the direction of the music in terms of wanting to tone down some of the occult stuff and kind of being a little bit uncomfortable with how much and how overt the sort of Satanism and stuff was in the lyrics, and that's ultimately what kind of leads the band to kind of have a partial shutdown for a while. But yeah, certainly Slayer, Metallica, Witchery was another band you mentioned. Certainly Emperor, which we mentioned in the last set with their cover of Gypsy, Cradle of Filth. I mean, just the whole gothic metal scene, really. Anything that deals with darkness and occult. I mean,
I'd even say it'd be this might sound kind of weird, but the first couple Anathema records.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Just that kind of
the aesthetic and the atmosphere.
Yeah.
Yep. Certain My Dying Bride. I mean, anything that was sort of.
I think the whole Bridge of Doom scene has a lot to owe to them. I mean, it might not be totally apparent, but you can hear a lot of it in their music.
And that was the thing. That was that great leap of faith that I think you and I both had to make in terms of getting past the point of the vocals getting in our way of understanding how important the music was. And once you realize how important the music was, you go back and you start to appreciate the way that the vocals start to mix in terms of interacting with the melodies, and I mean, they're over top everything. And there's a lot of accentuation of his vocals with the drums and the rhythms and things like that, and it really does work really well. And it's almost like being blind to this whole scene of Merciful Fate, and then suddenly you have this epiphany, and you're like, oh, I get Merciful Fate.
Yeah, I mean,
I
what was it
what they're doing
in 2000 or something? We had the opportunity to see, and we're like, nah, we're too tired.
We were at Metal Fest and went to Giuseppe's in Milwaukee instead of seeing Merciful Fate. So you win some, you lose some, I guess. But Don't Break the Oath is the second of the early era of Fate, the second record in the 80s, really, and the last record they're going to do until the early 90s. And this seems to be for a lot of people kind of a fan favorite. And I mentioned, I think earlier, that I think if they were going to do a Hall of Fame in Decibel, they might pick this one, only because I think it's it's a little crisper. It's a little more...
It's more refined.
Yeah, more focused and things like that. And I think his vocals are really kind of...
I think, this is the peak of his vocal performance right here. And I know with this album, they were actually in the studio in the mixing process as well, which they weren't on Melissa.
And I think that's why it had that sort of like
it's got
older
a dirty
tone.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like somebody was like recording a prog band when they hook these guys up.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. And speaking of prog, you'll start to hear some of that a little bit more.
Hear a little Rush, hear a little Thin Lizzy going on.
Yeah, certainly. Thin Lizzy you'll hear in Gypsy, which is the song we'll kind of open up with. And then Rush, both of us really picked up on Come to the Sabbath, which is a pretty cool song. And even that song itself is another one of these sort of mini epics. It's not as long as Satan's Fall, but it kind of has like a couple of different movements in Come to the Sabbath. But the other thing I notice here is a lot more sort of Sabbath influence. They're able to sort of slow down on some songs, and even the solo in Come to the Sabbath. You and I were both pointing out that there were very few solos that were like this at the time. The only thing you and I could really put our heads around was the solo from, like, say, Phantom of the Opera, where there was just this sort of like just that style of picking that really becomes big, especially in the Gothenburg scene years later. With its sort of twin lead melodies sort of kind of bouncing off each other. Yeah. So, kind of a lot of cool things happening here. But again, it's still building off of the steam that sort of Melissa brought forth. I
guess Melissa, according to what I've been reading, was like a huge, like nobody thought they could ever top that record for like a first, the sophomore slump thing. But I think they stepped up, pretty well for the most part on this one.
Yeah.
It's not as dynamic as I'd like. It's a little too polished in areas, but it's still a fantastic record.
Yeah, I think there's a couple songs that, I think they're fan favorites, but they're songs that, like, I hear and it's almost like too much. It's just a little too much. Like, they're trying a little too hard to, like, brighten it up and stuff, and it doesn't have the darkness that maybe I'm looking for, like Desecration of Souls or Night on Board. I can't remember. There was one of those songs where I kind of was like, I'd rather... I do like the Melissa stuff better, but... Boy, I was going to say something and I completely lost it. The cover. The cover is like awesome.
I'm sure there's many tattoos.
This is sort of one of those covers that you just stumble upon.
It's like a horned skull pointing its finger at you.
Yeah, I think it's it's probably Satan in the flames of hell. Don't break the oath.
Once your soul is mine, you'll never get it back.
Yeah, exactly. Pretty cool. Makes me think of The Simpsons when Bart sells his soul or something. But so cool stuff. But we're gonna hear a trio of songs here from Don't Break the Oath. We're gonna hear Gypsy, which of course Emperor did a cover of, and so this is has a warm place in my heart because this is the first Merciful Fate song I really ever heard. And then Dangerous Meeting, which has some killer Kill 'Em All, Search and Destroy kind of riffs working on it in a couple of places.
Yeah.
And then Come to the Sabbath, which we talked about with some of the Rush and Phantom of the Opera kind of elements working for it. So enjoy.
I see the gypsy
All right, just heard Come to the Sabbath, Dangerous Meeting, and Gypsy from Merciful Fate on the Requiem Metal podcast here. And let us know what you think. You know, if you had similar epiphanies on Merciful Fate, or if you're still resistant to the power of the diamond, or maybe you've been a sort of a fan since the early 80s. You know, shoot us an email, Requiem Metal Podcast at gmail.com. What'd I say? Requiem Metal? Oh, sorry. Requiem Podcast at gmail.com. Too excited about the diamond.
It's shiny.
The next stage that sort of happens is, of course, they break up. I was just reading some of the liner notes about how Sherman was really interested in pursuing another musical direction. You know, obviously he wasn't too excited about the occult stuff.
Yeah.
He brought a couple of funk songs to the songwriting table in like '85, and Diamond realized that, you know, this just wasn't going to work out anymore, and so they needed to kind of move on. And he took with him a couple of troops.
Yeah, took Diener and took Hansen, the bass player, and the guitarist, the other guitarist, and picked up Andy LaRocque and Mickey D to go on to Motorhead fame as drummer.
Yeah, and LaRocque, well, we'll talk a little about what his contributions were, but he went solo and started releasing records under the name King Diamond. Started with 1986 Fatal Portrait, and then he kind of did a couple of probably my favorites, Abigail in '87, and Them in 1988, and I think he did one more, Conspiracy, like in '89 or '90, and then of course Reform Merciful Fate in '91. So he goes through, like I said, a solo period where really most of the records, if I'm not mistaken, are all organized around
they're all theme albums.
Or
concept albums.
Concept album,
yeah.
You know, and I'd say Abigail is kind of the maybe the extreme metal for, you know, Operation Mindcrime, you know, in terms of just having an impact that was pretty huge. I mean, most people you know, quote that as being one of the great Diamond records of all time, Merciful Fate or solo, you know. Much the same way when they talk about great metal concept records, they talk about Operation Mindcrime. Well, I throw Abigail in there too, and Them even. I lost my train of thought, but getting back to Andy LaRocque, some people know him from the 90s because he made a couple of appearances in Sweden and in America. He first played with
At the Gates and Slaughter of the Soul.
At the Gates, Slaughter of the Soul. He plays the solo on Cold, but he's also
on Death.
Individual Thought Patterns.
That's right.
Yeah, he's the guitar player there. So, you know, he's a sought after guitar player, and to this day, I think is he still playing with King Diamond solo stuff? I have no idea.
I believe he's still in the band. So.
I mean, I have to attest to like a lack of knowledge of really anything.
Maybe he's not.
The last
I don't even know. I've got
6 or 7 years of King Diamond Merciful Fate history.
Yeah, I've got most of the stuff, but so I mean, there's quite a revolving lineup on a lot of that stuff.
And you're the completest out of this. So I have the old stuff, but Mark has a lot
You're
of
the one with the memory. I'm the one that has all the crap.
The late 90s, early 2000s Merciful Fate King Diamond stuff.
When I was working at the record store, I got like
did they all come in?
and all those other ones are.
See, I guess if I could buy them for $3 or $4 now, I'd totally pick that stuff up. But just because, you know, we're not doing a King Diamond show, but in terms of you people out there who are new to anything King Diamond, we wanted to just sort of, you know, kind of give you an opportunity to make a kind of a comparison sound-wise between what the solo stuff sounded like compared to some of the Merciful Fate stuff. You know, thematically and stuff like that, a lot of it was fairly similar. There wasn't like a real huge divergence other than the
Diamond
storytelling
took
aspect.
over a lot in the songwriting aspects too. He wrote I'd say about 70% of the record, and then had LaRocque basically was just a lead player. He wasn't a great songwriter by any means. But,
yeah, and I mean, they almost like built songs for LaRocque and Diener to just like twin lead solo over everything, you know.
And this is much more of it's a focal piece on Diamond's vocals. I mean, it's almost like more of a rock sensibility to a little bit more traditional arrangements. There's not quite as much of the symphonic stuff going on like on some of the previous records.
But the rhythm section in particular, especially in the song we're going to play, which is A Mansion in Darkness from Abigail, Mickey D and Timmy Hansen just do such an incredible job of just with this driving force.
Fast, yeah.
And like you said, you're a bigger kind of Motorhead expert than I am, and you said that Mickey D basically took that style and just has been doing it with Motorhead for the last 15
Yeah, I'm not sure if
so
he's still
years.
with them, but he was with them for a lot of albums, and yeah, he could just he can play the double bass balls out theme like nonstop from dusk till dawn. Yeah, it's tight.
Very underrated. And I think, so much of the time, guys like Hank Sherman or Andy LaRocque or even Denner get all the attention, in terms of the musicianship of King Diamond stuff. But I think he's
always surrounded himself with really high caliber musicians.
Yeah, you got to really throw it out to the
I got to say that LaRocque looks a lot like George Lynch in this picture of Abigail.
Man, I'm a huge Dokken fan, so I got no problem.
I'm a recent, Dokken.
Yeah, Mark resisted for many, many years, and he's starting to come around to the fact that they might not write great songs, but there were some great moments in Dokken songs. So, but anyways, let's we wanted to throw a little sample out at you. So we're only going to hear one song from King Diamond's solo stuff. And if you like this kind of stuff, I recommend Abigail and Them. I don't know, you're a Fatal Portrait fan as well, too.
Yeah, I go Fatal Portrait and Conspiracy as well. I mean, those 4 records are pretty solid.
Mm-hmm. You can't go wrong. Because, I mean, it really... It's a straight line of continuous great songwriting from Melissa in 83 right up to In the Shadows in 91. I mean, there's really not a bad moment in
that's a lot of good records for anybody. I mean, you look back at like somebody like Metallica that has 5 good records?
Yeah, 5 in a row, and then they start to falter.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's tough to pull that off, and especially with the revolving door of musicians and different songwriters and
I think he's
things like that.
Diamond's always had his eye on the prize and knows exactly what he wants out of this, and he's not going to do anything else.
Sure. And you'll hear that in A Mansion in Darkness from King Diamond's solo career.
To show the way,
you heard a little late 80s King Diamond solo career, just to sort of keep you in the chronology game of where the trajectory of his career kind of went. And you were commenting that, by the time 91 rolls around, I mean, really think about the metal scene in 84, where thrash hadn't even really busted out. Motley Crue had just put out Shout at the Devil. I mean, really, metal was in a strange place then, and all the stuff that happens. And lo and behold, 91 rolls around, extreme metal's going, thrash is dead, hair metal's dead, and all of a sudden...
We got Injustice for All and Rest in Peace, and then this comes out.
And then In the Shadows comes out, and I mean, you said this has got to be up there in terms of one of the greatest kind of comeback records.
I mean, for being out of... I mean, and really, King Diamond was going on that entire time, but to come back, and I mean, there's a distinct difference in songwriting style when we come back to Merciful Fate, and having like a 10-year hiatus, coming back and still being like on. I mean, almost more so than they ever were before. Sure.
I mean, In the Shadows, I've went on record. This might be my favorite Merciful Fate record. I don't know.
I think it's my second favorite.
Second favorite. I think you could say that this is a comeback record for Hank Sherman.
Yeah.
I don't know what he was doing. I think he started some pop band for a while and then
he did a
fizzled.
band called Fate.
Yeah. Ooh, I guess pop. I've never heard them, but so for Hank Sherman, it's the greatest comeback record. So. But In the Shadows, Metal Blade Records got a hold of this. I guess we should probably say that the early stuff was put out by Roadrunner, the first
Road Racer
back in the day. Yeah. But Metal Blade, they picked these. They picked this up. And this came out in 93. So we're talking almost 9 years in between records. And on the cover is probably Melissa staring at the old oak, which is the third track.
Well, it's nice that you look at all these. You've got the Legend of the Headless Rider. He's chilling out back here. The old oak tree.
Yep, a lot of the themes that will make it onto the record, but a lot of kind of old themes too, I mean, Melissa, I forgot to mention this when we were listening to the Don't Break the Oath stuff. Melissa made an appearance on each Merciful Fate record. She was on the title track to Melissa, obviously, and then she was actually the theme of Come to the Sabbath, which you heard a little bit earlier in the show. And then she's going to be the theme of our closing number this evening, which is the one where Mark's mentioned earlier, where you can hear it almost sounds like opera warm-up, kind of, he's doing like running vocal scales or something.
Yeah.
On Is That You, Melissa?
That's a fantastic track.
That's a cool tune, and I don't know, I can't say enough about this record, but the song that kind of really, sprouted to mind off this record the most, and probably got the most attention, especially for us living in Detroit, was Egypt. You saw it a lot in Headbangers Ball, right?
Yeah, they used to open the show up with it a lot, and I remember just sitting there laughing, because it starts out with King Diamond's head rotating around like a pyramid or something. So, and I'm sure you can go on YouTube and find it.
Oh yeah.
But for being super into the Swedish death metal stuff and black metal and everything else at 93, it was almost laughable.
Yeah, and there is we say this with all respect. There are some Spinal Tap-ish moments on Merciful Fate.
Yeah, Is That You, Melissa sounds like parts of Stonehenge.
Yeah, there's sort of.
But it's just the theatricality of the whole thing, and I really, I gotta give it up for Diamond sticking to it that long, because really you go to a show now and nobody puts on that extravagant of a show anymore. I mean, Maiden still has their pyrotechnics and Eddie walking out, and Priest comes on with their motorcycles or whatever, but it's. When you hear this music, it's got to be accompanied by crazy imagery, or what's the point?
Yeah,
he hammers it home every time. So
it's kind of like the old stuff that Alice Cooper used to do, where he'd decapitate himself on stage and do all that,
dance around with a snake and everything else.
Really cool stuff. But Egypt, this was sort of this and Gypsy are the two songs that kind of dragged me back kind of into Merciful Fate, because I kept hearing Gypsy all the time when we would go to this venue in Detroit to see extreme metal bands. That's Harpo's. I've seen Slayer, Opeth, you name it.
Well, they'd have Girls, and then
they always play, and then the video screen would come down in between bands, and they'd play a series of videos, and Egypt from Merciful Fate was always on there, and it would get stuck in my head, the opening vocal lines, and so I think I bought this song on iTunes 4 years ago or 5 years ago when I first started teaching, and on occasion, when we're driving around and I'm transporting cross country kids from places just rock it out. We'd roll all the windows down. The kids could kind of sing along. It's almost a history lesson in a song,
exactly.
And I teach Egyptian history and one of the components of world history, so I don't think I've ever played it in
Egypt
class.
and some Power Slave songs.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Although I have, like I said in a previous podcast, played some Enslaved and some other things as little history lessons. So maybe Diamond, you're coming up. Your moment in the spotlight's coming soon.
Like Curse the Pharaohs in Egypt.
Yeah, exactly. We can do a whole
Corpse Without a Soul
thematic Egyptian history unit. But Egypt, that song in particular kind of brought me back in. It's a cool song.
It's a great album opener.
And not only is it a great album opener, but I also mentioned that I think it's not without purpose that it has this opening scream and then just goes right into a dynamic, awesome solo.
First, there's
Hank Sherman.
One power chord that just like, okay, this is going to be awesome, and he just goes into that solo straight out of that.
And it's like no one's heard Hank Sherman play a metal riff since '84. So like,
he just shreds on the song.
There's sort of a higher purpose, I think, to what's going on there. And then you mentioned later on in the song, though, the Denner solo reminded you of Megadeth.
Yeah, I really like a lot of the stuff they're doing in Rust in Peace, where it's like not the obvious next progression that you'd expect out of the song. And even vocally, I was listening to a couple Megadeth records a couple days ago, and not the high screams, of course, but just like I could never really pin down where Mustaine was coming from with his vocal style. And part of it comes from he doesn't have that dynamic of a range to begin with, but it's a lot of it seems informed by Merciful Fate or King Diamond, kind of the more talky, the stuff where King Diamond's just trying to like explore a theme, and he's like doing his different voices or his laughter and stuff like that. So
really puts Sweating Bullets in a lot of perspective.
Yeah, really.
Because there's a song that is almost cringeworthy at times because of like how like his vocals work, but in a way, if you kind of put him through the scope of King Diamond, it almost makes sense what he's trying to do there.
Yeah, that was another band that it took me a while to get past the vocals in Megadeth, but once you get to the music,
sure,
there's some solid stuff
dynamic
there.
And of course, he would have been part of Metallica in '82, '83 when they were listening to a lot of the Diamond demos or the Merciful Fate demos, and being influenced by that songwriting wise, certainly. So, we're going to open up things with Egypt and then get into Bell Witch, which was based on an old, apparently...
Back in Tennessee,
a true ghost story here. And very sleazy, kind of has that...
It's got a great, like sleazy, Motley Crue-ish, Scorpions kind of feel to it.
Sure. And I think Scorpions, too, is, like we mentioned earlier, Denner and Sherman are almost like Uli Jon Roth and Schenker and the 70s Scorpions kind of era in terms of that sleazy... kind of German thrash kind of feel.
So catchy, yeah.
And there was a song earlier too, and I can't remember. We were talking about it. I think it was "Curse of the Pharaohs" or "Into the Coven," where you were talking about how it would be a great stripper song because it was so sleazy.
It's like a girls kind of thing.
Yeah, it's just got that. So Bell Witch is in the grand tradition of all that, but good stuff. It's got a lot of different dynamics and solos and things. And then probably my favorite song from the record, "A Gruesome Time." And this has more melodies working for it, and I think Denner wrote the song, so he's more the melodic songwriter. But Mark and I were we're scratching our head trying to figure out what the melodic sort of vocal chorus sounds like. It reminds us of something, and he and I can't wrap our heads around it. So if shoot us an email, let us know, because it will help us sleep easier at night sometimes. But Gruesome Time, I've had this song in my head for like
I think it actually has a Megadeth riff in it now that I think about it.
Is that what it is?
I think so.
Okay.
Which I don't know if it came before or after this, but...
Yeah. It's hard to say, who's inspiring who at this point, because now, they've been away for so long, 9 years, that all their influences are big.
It's almost like a Hangar 18 feel now that I...
Okay.
Like more the rhythm back section, not that main riff, but I'll have to listen to that.
Well, if you hear something else in it, let us know, and then we're going to end with one of your favorites.
Is that you, Melissa?
Is that you, Melissa? So we hope you've sort of spent some good quality time with the King tonight.
His name is truly warranted.
Yeah, I was almost tempted to throw in SOD King at the King, where he's ordering some Burger King. It's great. I mean, it's all tongue in cheek, and I think those SOD guys are probably big Merciful Fate fans, or at least Scotty and Charlie are. But hopefully you've really had a good time tonight, kind of exploring some of the highlights of the Diamond's, solo and Merciful Fate stuff.
Even if it doesn't hit you all at once, I guarantee you're going to have some of these stuck in your head.
Yeah, you'll be hearing these melodies in some places, and again, listen to this stuff with an open mind. Maybe go back, listen to a couple choice tracks that maybe you didn't love everything, like initially, like what we were like, but like grab out of those one or two songs that you heard here and kind of branch off of that, and then slowly open yourself up to some of the other Fate stuff, and I think you'll have no problem kind of,
accepting the diamond as your personal savior.
Accepting the diamond as your personal savior. So, and remember, no presents for Christmas,
That's
kids.
right.
So, for Jason Hundy
and Mark Rudolph,
this is the Requiem Metal Podcast.